What's up once again? This is Erik Stafford with the Kansas City Tour Company. I want to thank you for joining me. The last time I was on live was just actually maybe about 5-10 minutes ago. I forgot to shout out my boy Chris Shropshire. He had a mean set shot back in the day and used to talk plenty of trash and hit it right in your face over and over and over. But that was one of my childhood partners growing up. Raytown South in the house. Coach Light, neighborhood always and forevermore. Once again, I'll be reading one of my articles that was published in the Kansas City Call newspaper maybe about a month ago. It was called Kansas City and the Black Vote, the Last 100 Years. I also want to let everybody know that we will be offering virtual tours. We will be offering virtual tours, and you can sign up through our website at www.kansascitytourcompany.com. Every tour that we offer, any of our regularly scheduled tours will also have the virtual option available for you to select as well. So, once again, I'll be reading from one of the articles that was published in the Kansas City Star. One of the articles that was published in the Kansas City Call. Excuse me for that. One of the articles that was published in the Kansas City Call. I've been doing a series for the past month now. 100 years. The Kansas City Call has been in publication for over 100 years. It was established by C.A. Franklin in 1919. So once again, all respect due to the Kansas City Call newspaper for keeping us informed for the last 100 years. Kansas City and the Black Vote. Kansas City and the Black Vote for the last 100 years. Going back to Reconstruction, blacks in the South were caught between a rock and a hard place. Added to the U.S. Constitution were the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, except in the event of a crime. The 14th Amendment gave blacks due process and equal protection of the law. So, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery except in the event that you commit a crime. The 14th Amendment gave blacks due process of law and equal protection of the law, which is what a lot of our civil rights legislation is based upon. The 15th Amendment gave blacks the right to vote. Landowners and merchants swore not to give credit to blacks who voted Republican. They were afraid to vote Democrat for fear they would be re-enslaved. After the Civil War, the Wyandotte Constitution and the state of Missouri did not initially give blacks the right to vote. Freedmen became their own activists, forming the Missouri Equal Rights League. John Mercer Langston was employed by the organization to secure the right to vote and be educated. His brothers, Charles Henry Langston and Gideon, were the first blacks to graduate from Oberlin College in Ohio. Charles Henry Langston was one of the first administrators of the Quindaro Freedman School, which later became Webster University in Kansas City, Kansas. He is the grandfather of Langston Hughes. Langston University in Langston, Oklahoma is named after John Mercer Langston. Looking to further disenfranchise white Democrats, former Confederates, Republicans extended the vote to blacks. Republicans extended the vote to blacks. Blacks in Missouri secured the right to vote in 1870. Confederate sympathizers sought vengeance and retribution by robbing banks. In 1866, the first daylight bank robbery occurred in Clay County, Missouri. The James Younger gang was mentioned in the Clay County hoist. As the robbers grew more brazen, trains delivering money to the bank were targeted. Soon they began to tip the balance of the federal economy. A bounty was placed on the head of the infamous Jesse James. Jim Pendergrass was the first Irish immigrant prone to gambling. He grew up in St. Joseph, Missouri, next door to where Jesse James was assassinated by Robert Ford. Like a lot of other immigrants, he came to Kansas City after the construction of the Hannibal Bridge, which was the first bridge to cross the Missouri River. He followed a hunch to put his money on a long-shot horse named Climax to win a race. The horse delivered, and with the winnings, Pendergast opened up a tavern in the West Bottoms on 12th Street around the corner from Kansas City's first Union Station. He even hired Frank James, the older brother of Jesse James, as a bouncer. The city grew to be the second largest livestock exchange in the nation. Actually, the second largest livestock exchange in the world. Chicago was the largest livestock exchange in the world, and Chicago was the only livestock exchange larger than ours. So when people when people refer to Kansas City as a cow town, they're actually right, because 80% of our economy came from the packing houses down in the West Bottoms. That was our industrial district. The Italians also came with a lot of other immigrants at this time, because there was work here in those packing houses, the grain and feed factories. And so the Italians, they came, they settled in the area of what is known as Columbus Park, and they brought their Sicilian customs of omerta, which meant that they handled their own affairs, and that of being politically astute. Blacks helped build the Hannibal and settled with other ethnic groups on the east side of the West Bottoms in a section referred to by the police as Hell's Half Acre. Prendergast opened the doors of his tavern to the gamblers who worked in the packing houses and the grain and feed factories. As a man of the people, he advocated for a public park and low telephone rates. He was elected alderman of the 1st Ward, and he served the people for 18 years. To gain favor with Southern Democrats, Rutherford B. Hayes signed the Great Compromise of 1877. Federal troops were stationed in the South to protect the lives of blacks. Blacks were able to make considerable gains during Reconstruction. Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce were elected to the U.S. Senate. Robert Smalls returned to his plantation and actually brought his master's house. Threatened by the political power of blacks, organizations like the Ku Klux Klan rose up to terrorize blacks from voting. Benjamin Pap Singleton led blacks out of the South and into the Kansas City area. Blacks settled along the Missouri and Kansas rivers. They established tent villages and found work in the packing houses. Due to industrialization, the bottoms became overcrowded. Blacks and other ethnic groups began to populate the Belvedere and the Hicks Hollows area. In 1882, the black vote as a collective held enough political power to be considered. Paul Gadsden, D.V.A. Nero, and James Woodland sent a message to the white power structure. They organized the Independent Negro Party. Because of their loyalty to the Republican Party, due to Abraham Lincoln receiving credit for freeing the slaves, blacks were the benefactors of political appointments. In 1906, William T. Vernon was appointed Registrar of the U.S. Treasury under the presidencies of Theodore Roosevelt and William H. Taft. As a registrar, his name appeared on a $2 bill. Both the Kansas City Sun, edited by Nelson Cruz, and the Kansas City Call newspaper were Republican-oriented newspapers at this time. In the 1920s and in the 1930s, they were Republican-oriented newspapers. The Kansas City Sun and the Kansas City Call were both Republican newspapers. In order to regain political power, Democrats began to cater to the black vote. Early black organizers for the Democratic Party in Missouri were Howard Smith and J.J. Mattjoy of Kansas City and B.E. Watkins of St. Louis, Missouri. Leon H. Jordan fought as an immune along with Lafayette Tillman and J.E. Perry in the Spanish-American War. Lafayette Tillman, was one of the first blacks to serve in the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. Perry established a sanitarium for blacks on 12th and Vine, and it was known as Perry Sanitarium, which later became Wheatley Provident Hospital, and the building still stands today at 1826 Forest. When Jordan returned to Kansas City after the war, he settled in a home on 12th and Vine. In 1896, the federal government then passed Plessy versus Ferguson, which was also known as separate but equal. But up until that time, blacks and whites lived amongst each other. It was more so based upon class. But then with Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, that's when they began to separate the races. And blacks, they lived primarily east of Troost and west of Benton, between the Missouri River and 24th Street. Then you have small pockets of blacks that lived in Westport, also Leeds and Independence, Missouri, and Liberty, Missouri as well. But primarily, most blacks lived between 12th and 18th Street. Also, our tours are scheduled regularly. Go to www.kansascitytourcompany.com to confirm your tour booking for any of our regularly scheduled historic tours. www.kansascitytourcompany.com. Go there to confirm your tour for Bebop and Beyond, 18th and Vine, Walking Tour, Streetcar KC, a River City Civil Rights Tour, and Streetcar KC, a River City Mafia Tour, and Penn School was in Westport, walking tour. So right after slavery ended, during that time period of Reconstruction, and we would see the rights to the Hannibal Bridge, and we were the second largest livestock exchange in the nation, Kansas City grew to be a wide open and very permissive town. The city was loaded with gambling dens, brothels, and taverns. In 1917, the federal government passed the Volstead Act, which prohibited the manufacturing and distribution of liquor. Neither blacks nor working class immigrants, whites, took prohibition seriously at all. It was not enforced here at the local level. Blacks were able to earn some sort of livelihood in the underground economy fueled by vice. Kansas City did not recognize prohibition on a local level, setting the stage for the birth of ragtime and the maturation of jazz. Jordan was a political organizer that managed the Autumn Leaf Club on 12th Street and served on the board of Lang Hospital. Republican canvassers found 38 Democrats registered at the Jordan's Autumn Leaf Club. His money was long enough to finance a mail campaign to petition the federal government to investigate the East St. Louis race riot in 1917. During World War I, black workers were recruited from the South to replace white workers at the aluminum ore company. After allegations of an attempted robbery of a white man by a black man, white mobs unleashed terror upon the lives of black folks. Blacks were pulled off streetcars and beaten to death. Homes were burned to a black crisp. Blacks were lynched as buildings burned in the background. That same year, black men were fighting in World War I to help the United States. They want us to fight and die for them over there, killed us like nothing over here, and it is still like that today. Shot them down like they were out shooting pigs or stray dogs, shot them in their houses, shot their babies and women, burned down houses with people in them, and hung some black men from lampposts. Anyway, black people who survived it used to talk about it. Miles Davis, Miles, the autobiography. Miles Davis he grew up in East St. Louis, Missouri, where this riot took place in 1917. It was concluded by a special committee formed by the U.S. House of Representatives that neither the National Guard nor the East St. Louis Police Force acted appropriately in the given situation. 34 people were tried as conspirators of the riot. Dr. Leroy Bundy, a Republican dentist who had migrated to East St. Louis, Missouri from Ohio, was the last person tried. It was alleged that he had planned an influx of illegal voters to influence a city election. When 2 white detectives were killed in the riots, Bundy was arrested and eventually convicted on a weak case. He was defended by W.C. Houston of the law firm of Houston Callaway of Kansas City, Homer Phillips of St. Louis, and P.W. Howard of Jackson, Mississippi. After differences with the NAACP legal counsel, his conviction was overturned during an appeal at the Illinois Supreme Court. He moved back to Cleveland and was chosen by Marcus Garvey to serve as president of the Cleveland Division of the Universal Negro Improvement Association in 1922. L.A. Knox was the first black from Jackson County elected to the Missouri State Legislature. He defeated a white political rival to become the new representative of the 4th District. While in the legislature, he was able to pass a law that required that a school be established in every school district with at least 8 school-aged youth. Prior to a district needed 15 school-aged youth for a school. Lowering the requirement gave more blacks access to public education. In spite of the Democrats doing more to build a black base of support, black voters were still skeptical in 1920. James Silas Harris offered his thoughts in the Kansas City Sun newspaper. But the hour of reckoning is at hand. The people will no longer be led by that gang of old fossils, he was referring to Democrats, who are now clamoring for a new lease of life. Just a few years ago, they had fought, bled, and died to perpetuate human slavery. Failing, they bent every energy to crush and humiliate the enfranchised freedmen, and their hellish work has gone on uninterrupted from that hour until the present day. Blacks had not forgotten how the Democrats in the South took away the constitutional rights of their brothers and sisters in those states. Re-enslaving them, sharecropping was an extension of slavery veiled by a false hope that farmers would earn a share of the crop. Lynch mobs continued to organize for thousands of spectators to see the spectacle of another nigger hung. In 1922, the Call paper gave an account of the audacious arrogance of the white elect concerning the black vote. James A. Reed, backed by the Pendergast political machine, displayed constant hate for blacks, going so far as to command a Louisiana lynch mob, once again a helpless Negro victimized. His words to them were, "They ought to be wiped out." Blacks continue to be displeased at the unwillingness of the Republican Party to enforce the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. Although blacks had the right to vote in Kansas City, they were segregated and denied access to public facilities paid for by their tax dollars. Negroes continued to be victims of police brutality. Attorney Carl Johnson represented Kenneth Campbell, Piney Brown, Homer Roberts, and Ulysses Arnold in seeking a court order granting blacks access to Swope Park golf course in 1928, as early as 1928. Blacks were trying to integrate Swope Park. They were paying for Swope Park through their tax dollars, which was actually eating up their purchasing power at the stores, because they were being taxed for a park that they didn't have access to, so that took away their purchasing power at the stores. So that's why it's important to vote, because the taxes affect your purchasing power. Swope Park Golf Course President Ellis Parsons stated accordingly that blacks had no rights to access public facilities that weren't specifically designated for them. Therefore, black purchasing power was depleted by taxes supporting baseball diamonds, bathhouses, swimming pools, and tennis courts they were excluded from. Circuit Court Judge Brown Harris denied their application. Go to www.kansascitytourcompany.com to schedule your booking for any of our regularly scheduled tours. www.kansascitytourcompany.com. You can schedule a virtual tour or a physical tour. Physical tour, we are limited to 10 people due to COVID. But the virtual tours, I encourage everyone to sign up for a virtual tour or a physical tour. But the virtual tour, you don't have to go anywhere, and you can still sign up and get a deeper understanding of the value of Kansas City's rich culture. The Kansas City Tour Company promotes and celebrates the history and culture of Kansas City. Felix Payne was a gainsman who owned a barbershop that served as a tavern on 3rd and Delaware in the River Market. It is likely he met Casimir Welch and Jim's younger brother, Tom Pendergast, when they owned a messenger company in the West Bottoms, which may have been used by Payne to facilitate his policy or numbers enterprise. In turn, Felix Payne encouraged blacks to vote Democrat. Pendergast was known for corrupting elections. The machine hired poor people to vote multiple times. They registered people in the names of dead people and at the addresses of vacant homes. Although they did nothing to eradicate segregation, he made political appointments and allowed the underworld to make money undeterred. In order to survive, the Pendergast machine catered to everyone. The methods used to maintain support from groups more aligned to white Christian values often resulted in being detrimental to blacks. Whites was quarantined in the black community and set apart from whites. It would have been hard for any casual walker along 12th Street strolling from west to east not to see deviation in the comparison of white people on 12th and Grand to black people on 12th and Forest. Nonetheless, people like Count Basie found work in Kansas City during the Depression. Mary Lou Williams, known as the First Lady of Jazz, notes that there were over 50 taverns just on 12th Street. There were no DJs, so patrons were entertained via musician. After reforming the Mafia into La Costa Nostra, our theme, Charles Luciano announced plans at a meeting hosted by Al Capone in Chicago to gradually permeate the Democratic Party. Pendergast began to finance a paper in the black community of Kansas City known as the Kansas City American. It was published by William J. Tompkins and Felix Payne. The purpose of the paper was to recruit blacks into the Democratic Party. Go to our website at www.kansascitytourcompany.com. The Kansas City Tour Company promotes and celebrates the history and culture of Kansas City. Sign up for any of our regularly scheduled historic tours. Bebop and Beyond, 18th and Vine Walking Tour, Streetcar KC, a River City Civil Rights Tour, and Streetcar KC, a River City Mafia Tour, and Penn Scoobers in Westport Walking Tour. In 1928, bosses in the Italian community, such as Johnny Lazia, Gaetano Lococo, Tony Gizzo, and Dominique Benaggio, held a meeting with the Negro Women Democratic Club on behalf of the Democratic Party. Many of the blacks who supported the Pendergast political machine were content to have a conversation with the boss himself on 19th and Vine, or for one of his representatives to come to the neighborhood and listen with no action. However, there were people like D.A. Holmes of the Paseo Baptist Church who spoke out against vice, police brutality, and the corruption of the political machine. Roy Wilkins, writer for the Kansas City Call from 1923 to 1931, spoke out regularly against gambling and how the black policy racket specifically exploited the faith of black hope for the big payday. Even though gambling was illegal, Felix Payne had a spinning policy wheel in broad daylight in front of his club on 12th Street. Whenever Roy Wilkins called the police to raid any of Payne's clubs, his club patrons would be arrested but immediately released. It was a matter laughed about amongst the musicians at Payne's club. At one of his clubs, he had a singing bartender by the name of Big Joe Turner. He was the first to sing Shake, Rattle, and Roll before Bill Haley and the Comets and before Elvis. Roy Wilkins would leave Kansas City and ultimately become the executive director of the NAACP from 1964 to 1977. Felix Payne was allowed to continue his illegal entrepreneurial pursuits with the backing of the machine. In turn, he organized 75 black Democratic clubs across the state of Missouri. Roosevelt was elected president. He rewarded William J. Tompkins with a political appointment, higher than any other achievable by a black man at that time. Felix Payne was a philanthropic agent of the black community. He contributed to the defense fund of the Dr. Leroy Bundy. He raised money for the Whitley Provident Hospital, the Paseo YMCA, the Kansas City Monarchs, and Liberty Memorial. Truman, with the backing of the Pendergast political machine, won the U.S. Senate seat in March of 1934. During the election, 4 people were murdered at the polls. 11 were injured. The first person to die was a black precinct captain named William Finley. He was murdered by Sam Casciola, who was hit with one of Finley's bullets. Casciola received medical attention at a nearby hospital and was later released with no charges. When Truman ran for re-election in the 1940s, Tompkins was chosen the head of the Negro division of Truman's campaign. As President Truman was unable to get Roger Slaughter of Kansas City to cooperate in the passage of his Fair Employment Practice Bill, Truman ran an unknown candidate named Enos Actel against Slaughter in the primary, who lost by 6,000 votes. Truman sought the aid of the machine in the general election, and Axtell was able to redeem himself with a convincing victory over Slaughter. The election board got suspicious, and the issue came before the Jackson County Court. The ballots were kept as evidence in a safe at the Day Courthouse. To set off the night before trial, someone snuck in the courthouse to set off nitroglycerin, destroying the evidence. Estella Carter testified that she was prevented from voting on Election Day by a Jewish gangster named Morris Snag Klein. She arrived at the polls and was told, "You already voted." She also testified that Klein put money in her hand and told her to buy herself some beer. Carter gave an affidavit, and her testimony led to Klein serving 18 months in federal penitentiary. To President Truman's credit, he desegregated the armed forces in 1948. Blacks in Kansas City organized to unify their vote through Freedom, Inc. in 1962. J. McKinley Neal was the only black representative from within the black community, yet he was endorsed by a white political organization. Neal beat Leon Jordan, son of Leon H. Jordan, in the primary, and Bruce R. Watkins in the general election, who have filed as a Republican. Bruce's adoptive father, T.B. Watkins, was one of the first blacks to file for political office in Kansas City. He and his brother, J.T., opened Watkins Brothers Funeral Home in 1906. Understanding the need to mobilize and unify the black vote, Freedom Inc. was formed by Leon Jordan, Bruce R. Watkins, Harold Maupin, Charles Moore, Fred Curls, Leonard Hughes, and Leonard Hughes. Rosemary Lowe, Leon Jordan, Sterling Bryant, and Jesse Mills filed for committee seats on the Jackson County Democratic Committee. For support in the Second Ward, Freedom had to confer with another influential black political club known as the Brotherhood, led by Sylvester Babyface Norris, Henry Ross, Marshall Williams, and Sonny Gibson. Freedom, with the help of the Brotherhood, wrested control of the wards they lived in, going back to the days of Casimir Welch at the turn of the century to Alex Preston in the 1950s. Blacks had been under the influence of mob-style politics. Bruce R. Watkins and Earl Thomas were elected as the first blacks to serve on the city council in 1963. In 1964, they were responsible for the passage of the Public Accommodations Act. The City Public Accommodation Law was passed in 1964, prohibited discrimination based on race at hospitals, hotels, restaurants, and bars. Freedom mobilized the black community to vote through door-to-door canvassing and running their own candidates for political office. Harold Holliday Sr. and Leon M. Jordan were elected to the Missouri General Legislature in 1964. Bruce Watkins won his bid for Jackson County Courthouse Circuit Court Clerk, becoming the first black to win a countywide election in 1966. In 1968, Dr. William Bryan became the second black to win countywide when he was elected as a Jackson County coroner. Herman Johnson and Bill Carson were elected to the Missouri General Legislature in 1968. In 1970, Leon Jordan was assassinated. Coming out of the Green Duck Lounge, he was 65 years old. It was rumored to be a mafia hit. 5 years forthcoming. He got into a disagreement with Frank Mazuka, which resulted in a physical altercation. He was replaced by his wife, Orchid, who became the first African-American woman elected to the Missouri legislature. Freedom Inc. went on to become further entrenched into Kansas City's black community for generations to come. Charles Hasley was elected to the Kansas City Council in 1971. The next year, Harold Holliday Jr., Mamie Hughes, and Lee Vertus Swinton were elected to the Jackson County Legislature. In 1974, Joanne Collins became the first African-American woman elected to serve on the Kansas City Council. She retired in 1991. Bruce Watkins was elected to the Kansas City City Council in 1975. A year later, Alan Wheat was elected to the Missouri House of Representatives. Bruce R. Watkins advanced to the general election after winning the primary in his bid to become the first African mayor of Kansas City in 1979. I was 10 years old. He was defeated by Richard Berkeley in the general election. Emmanuel Cleaver, pastor of St. James United Methodist Church, was elected to the Kansas City Council that same year. Lee Vertus Swinton was elected as the first African American from Kansas City to the Missouri Senate in 1980. That same year, James D. Tyndall, Walter Peterson Jr., Earl Pitt Sr., and Mary Groves were elected to the Missouri House of Representatives. In 1982, Alan Wheat became the first African American to represent Kansas City, Missouri in the U.S. Congress. Mark Bryant was elected to the 5th District at large, and Phil Curls were elected to the State Senate in 1983. Carol Cole was elected to the Jackson County Legislature in 1986, and Reverend Emmanuel Cleaver became the first African American mayor in Kansas City in 1991. That was an excerpt from an article that I had written that was published in the Kansas City Call newspaper probably about a month ago. It's 100 years of the black vote here in Kansas City. And we need to value our vote and make people earn our vote, and make sure that people do not take our vote for granted. Once again, this is Erik Stafford coming to you live, lead tour guide for the Kansas City Tour Company. Go to www.kctour.com Kansas City Tour Company, all spelled out, .com to confirm your tour for any of our regularly scheduled tours. And any of our tours have the option to attend them virtually. Virtual tours now available through the Kansas City Tour Company. www.kansascitytourcompany.com.